Right now, in your workplace, your circle of friends, maybe even the person sitting across from you at dinner, there is someone who has already finished evaluating you, and they arrived at a conclusion you were never supposed to hear. It's not someone who declared themselves your enemy. They've smiled, shaken your hand, asked about your weekend. And while you were answering, they were running a calculation so fast it felt like instinct. And the verdict wasn't about your intelligence or your status. It was about your accessibility. Whether the subtle signals you send without realizing it mark you as someone who will absorb whatever is handed to them and simply call it life. Predators, and I choose that word with intention, do not pick targets at random. They aren't just taking a chance. They perform a behavioral scan so swift, so ingrained, that it operates beneath their own conscious thought. They are looking for a specific set of cues that tell them with absolute certainty, this one won't fight back. There was a man who mapped this kind of human behavior with a precision that made the powerful listen, and the institutions of his time try to silence him. Not because he was wrong, but because he was too right. What he documented about how people actually select, approach, and use each other was so brutally accurate that spreading it widely felt like handing out weapons. Machiavelli didn't observe power from a safe distance. He was inside it, watching it operate at its most ruthless, and he wrote down what he saw without softening a single detail. He left behind a line that contains the entire architecture of what we're discussing today. Once you hear it, the 6 behaviors we are about to break down will change how you see every interaction. He wrote, "Men are so simple and so much creatures of circumstance that the deceiver will always find someone ready to be deceived." He wasn't talking about stupidity. He was talking about signal. The involuntary behaviors that tell the predatory mind that deception isn't just possible, it's safe. 6 behaviors. You are probably exhibiting more than one of them right now. And by the time this video ends, you'll never broadcast them the same way again. Do not move. Before we get into the 6, you need to understand how predatory selection actually works, because most people think predators are obvious. They think exploitation comes with a warning label. It doesn't. The most dangerous people in your social environment aren't the ones who attack you outright. They're the ones who assess you first, quietly, methodically, over multiple interactions. They only act when the behavioral data they've collected gives them a confidence level high enough to move without risk. This is what behavioral criminology calls target viability assessment. It's the unconscious process where predatory personalities determine if a potential target will resist, report, or retaliate. It happens below the predator's conscious decision-making and below the target's conscious awareness. They are running the test on you without deciding to, and you are broadcasting the results without knowing it. The 6 behaviors we're covering are the most reliable signals a predatory brain reads as green. Not yellow, not maybe. Green, safe to proceed. Low resistance, high yield. And the reason most people never spot these signals in themselves is that every single one has a socially acceptable name, a polite label that disguises it as a virtue. Patience, flexibility, honesty, kindness, availability, openness. These are the masks the 6 behaviors wear in polite company. In the language of dark psychology, they have different names entirely. Let's begin. 1. Visible emotional reactivity. You don't just react in extreme circumstances. You react to small things, minor provocations, the kind of low-level friction a settled person absorbs without it even registering on their face. Someone makes a dismissive comment, and your expression changes. Someone questions your decision, and your body shifts. Someone gives a backhanded compliment, and the energy in your response shows it landed. You don't decide to react. It happens before the decision. And the predatory mind is watching for exactly this. When your emotional state can be altered by an outside stimulus, when your face, voice, or posture shifts in response to what someone does or says, you have demonstrated that your internal state is accessible from the outside. And accessible from the outside means controllable from the outside. This is called emotional permeability. It's the measurable degree to which your internal state is influenced by external social stimuli. High emotional permeability is the behavioral signature of someone who hasn't yet built a psychological interior separate from their environment. To a normal person, your reactivity is just expressiveness. To a predatory mind, it's a control panel. Because the moment they know which buttons move, you, they know which buttons to push. Now they know which stimuli alter your mood. They know which inputs deliver the outputs they need. They can make you defensive to get you to over-explain. They can make you guilty to get you to over-accommodate. They can make you angry to get you to make a mistake. You're not being read. You're being operated. Think about this. You're in a meeting. Someone casually undermines your contribution. Not aggressively casually. The way you'd brush lint off a jacket. And you feel it. Your posture shifts. Your response comes faster, louder than the conversation required. You thought you were defending your position. You were demonstrating your control panel to everyone in the room. Marcus Aurelius, who governed the most powerful empire on earth and was surrounded by political predators every day of his reign, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't writing philosophy. He was writing survival protocol. An emperor who could be visibly moved by events was an emperor who could be manipulated by the people who controlled those events. The fix isn't suppression. Suppression leaks. The harder you push an emotion down, the more it seeps out in micro-expressions, tone shifts, and timing irregularities. The fix is depersonalization, the practiced ability to observe what's happening to you from a slight internal distance. The way a doctor observes a patient's symptoms. The stimulus arrives. You witness your own reaction. You choose whether to act on it or let it pass through without producing a visible output. That gap between stimulus and visible response is your armor. Build it, because without it, you're advertising exactly what moves you. 2. Compulsive over-explanation. They ask you a simple question, or they make a mildly skeptical comment, or they just look at you with an expression that suggests they aren't fully convinced, and you talk for 4 minutes. Not because 4 minutes of information was required, but because the discomfort of their uncertainty was too intense to tolerate. Some part of your psychology cannot sit with the possibility that someone has a negative impression of you without immediately trying to correct it. This isn't communication. This is a confession. Every time you over-explain, every time you offer more justification than the situation called for, more context than the question required, more defense than the challenge warranted, you are confessing that your internal stability depends on external validation. And that dependency is one of the clearest green lights in the predatory assessment toolkit. This is called justification flooding. It's the pattern where someone responds to perceived judgment with an excessive volume of self-justifying information, driven by a need for approval that overrides the strategic calculation of what's actually appropriate to share. Justification flooding tells the predatory mind 3 things at once. First, this person's security can be destabilized by expressing doubt about them. So doubt is a lever. Second, this person will overshare information under social pressure. So pressure is an extraction tool. Third, this person believes they need the approval of the person they're speaking to in order to be right. So approval withdrawal is a control mechanism. 3 weapons delivered freely by you because someone looked at you with a slightly unconvinced expression. Here's the concrete example that will make you uncomfortable because you've done this version of it. You make a decision. Someone in your life expresses mild skepticism, not hostility, just skepticism. A raised eyebrow and, "Are you sure?" And you begin the context, the reasoning, the factors you considered, the alternatives you rejected and why, the contingencies you've prepared. You aren't informing them, you're pleading with them. And if they have predatory instincts, they aren't processing the information you're delivering. They're noting the desperation underneath it. They're noting that your position isn't self-sustaining, that it requires their agreement to feel solid to you. And now they know that withholding their agreement is a lever they can pull whenever they need something. Machiavelli was precise about this. He wrote about adapting to the times, but the deeper lesson is economy. The person who says the most with the least is the one who appears to have the most. Surplus communicates itself through restraint. Stop explaining. State your position. If they need more, they'll ask. And if they don't ask, the absence of their approval costs you nothing, because you never needed it in the first place. 3. Premature disclosure. You told them too much, too soon, not because they asked, but because they were warm. And warmth felt like safety, and safety felt like an invitation to be fully known. So you shared things that were real, things that mattered, things that in a room with the wrong person function less as connection and more as intelligence transfer. Your history, your fears, your past failures, The wound's still healing. The insecurities you haven't yet converted into discipline. You handed them the map of your interior. And in the predatory assessment framework, a detailed map of someone's interior isn't a gift. It's an acquisition. This is called premature intimacy disclosure. It's the pattern where someone shares personal, vulnerable, or strategically sensitive information before the relationship has established the trust needed to protect it. The predatory personality specifically cultivates the conditions that trigger this. They're warm early, unusually warm. They share something personal, often manufactured to create the illusion of mutual vulnerability. They ask questions that feel like genuine interest. They respond to your answers in ways that feel like deep understanding. This technique has a name: manufactured rapport. It's the deliberate creation of the feeling of deep connection through mirroring, strategic self-disclosure, and targeted validation, all to accelerate your willingness to share sensitive information. And it works on almost everyone because the human need to be known is one of the most powerful drives there is. You aren't stupid for falling for it. You're human, but understanding the mechanics removes the vulnerability. When you share your fears early, you hand them a targeting system. When you share your past failures, you hand them a credibility attack vector. When you share your deepest insecurities, you hand them the precise language they'll use to destabilize you the moment your interests diverge from theirs. Think about the relationships where this happened. The friend who knew everything about your psychology and used it against you in the first serious conflict. The colleague who was warm in the first weeks and referenced your vulnerabilities the first time you competed for the same thing. The partner who held your past failures and deployed them in arguments as evidence of permanent character. You didn't just share information. You armed them. The rule isn't coldness. The rule is earned access. Information about your interior isn't a social gift you give to people who are warm to you. It's territory you allow people to enter after they've demonstrated over time that they'll protect what's inside it. Share the surface. Protect the depth. Let time be the entry requirement. The people who deserve access will wait. The people who pressure you for access early, who make you feel that withholding is coldness, that privacy is damage, those people are telling you exactly what they plan to do with it. 4. Chronic availability. You're always there. Texts answered immediately. Requests accommodated without friction. Your presence offered before it's asked for. Your schedule adjusted to fit others without negotiating the cost. Every time someone needs something, you're available. And your availability is so consistent, so automatic, that it has stopped being a gift and become an expectation. You think this is loyalty. In the predatory assessment framework, this is a resource inventory with no security system. Chronic availability communicates one thing with devastating clarity. This person's time, energy, and attention have no enforceable price. They've been offered at zero cost so often that the market has established the value at zero. And a resource with no price is a resource that can be extracted without limit because the extraction produces no consequence. This is called availability exploitation. It's the process where a predatory personality identifies someone whose consistent availability has established a precedent of cost-free access and then systematically increases extraction until the person either collapses or finally enforces a limit. And then the predator frames that limit as a betrayal. That last part is important. When you finally say no after months or years of unlimited availability, the predatory personality doesn't recalibrate. They perform injury. They make the no into an event. They reference the history of your availability as evidence that the number is unreasonable. You've never had a problem with this before. I thought we were closer than this. I don't understand why you're being like this. You haven't changed. You've simply stopped being a free resource. But the predatory psychology experiences the enforcement of a price as theft because your availability established a precedent they treated as permanent. Robert Greene, who documented the mechanics of power with the same unflinching accuracy as Machiavelli, wrote, "Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. The person who is always available is always subordinate. The person who is sometimes unavailable, who must be reached, who must be scheduled, commands a fundamentally different position in the social hierarchy. Scarcity isn't manipulation. It's the authentic expression of a person who has things that matter more than the immediate comfort of whoever is reaching for them. Stop being reachable at all times, not as a game, but as genuine behavioral evidence of someone who has a life important enough to protect from interruption. The people who respect that boundary are the people worth being available to. The people who punish you for having it are the people the boundary was built to keep out. You think the next one won't apply to you. You're wrong. It applies to almost everyone watching this, and it's operating on you right now in at least one relationship without your awareness. 5. The apology reflex. You apologize for things that aren't your fault. Not in obvious ways, but in the small, almost invisible ways that accumulate into a pattern so consistent that the people around you have stopped noticing it because they've started expecting it. Someone bumps into you, and you say sorry. Someone is inconvenienced by something you didn't cause, and you apologize. Someone is upset, and you apologize for their upset before you've even established whether you contributed to it. Each individual apology looks like politeness. The pattern looks like submission. And submission, in the predatory behavioral assessment, is the most reliable indicator of target viability in the entire catalog. This is called reflexive appeasement behavior. It's the automatic, habitual deployment of apology or self-blame language in response to social tension or the displeasure of others, regardless of actual responsibility. When you apologize for something that isn't your fault, you do two things simultaneously. You accept responsibility for an outcome you didn't produce, establishing a precedent that you are responsible for the emotional states of the people around you. And you signal that the displeasure of the other person is sufficient to produce a concession from you, establishing displeasure as a leverage mechanism. Put those two things together, and you've handed the predatory mind a system. Make you feel responsible for their negative emotions. Express those negative emotions. Receive concessions. They don't even have to invent grievances. They just have to be visibly unhappy. You'll do the rest. Think about this in a relationship context. Your partner is upset. You don't know why yet. Before you've established whether you contributed to the upset, you've already adopted an apologetic posture. You're already moving toward them with the energy of someone who is responsible for what they're feeling. And if your partner has predatory traits, even mild ones, even unconscious ones, they've just learned something important about how this relationship works. Their unhappiness produces your concessions, before investigation, before justification, automatically. That's not a relationship. That's a system of extraction running on your apology reflex as the engine. The correction isn't to stop apologizing when you're actually wrong. It's to stop apologizing as a social reflex. To sit with someone else's displeasure without immediately assuming responsibility for it. To investigate before you concede. Apologizing when you're wrong is integrity. Apologizing when you're not wrong is a confession of weakness so precise that every predator in your environment will have noted it and filed it away before you finish the sentence. 6. Public displays of desperation. This is the one most people will resist identifying in themselves because desperation is a shameful word and most people have never applied it to their own behavior. But desperation doesn't always look like desperation from the inside. From the inside, it looks like caring deeply, working hard to maintain a connection, being honest about how much something means to you. From the outside, from the perspective of the predatory mind doing its assessment, it looks like something else entirely. It looks like someone whose internal economy is running at a deficit. Someone who needs more than they produce. Someone who will accept almost any terms to keep access to something they've decided they can't afford to lose. And someone who will accept almost any terms is someone who can be offered terrible terms. This is called scarcity signaling. It's the behavioral and verbal cues that communicate to others that the individual perceives their access to a resource as limited or threatened, which triggers a compulsive seeking behavior that overrides rational evaluation of the terms being offered. When you display publicly how much you need something, a relationship, a position, someone's approval, you have told the person who controls access to that thing exactly how high the price can go before you'll walk away. And in the predatory mind, that information is immediately used to set the price at exactly that level. Here's the specific scenario that most people have lived. You're in a relationship and something has gone wrong. There's distance. There's tension. There's the possibility that the connection might end, and the fear of that outcome overrides your strategic thinking. So you reach out too many times, too quickly, with too much visible urgency. You make the need visible. You make the fear of loss visible. And the person on the other side, if they have predatory instincts, doesn't feel the pull of your need as motivation to meet it. They feel the leverage of your need as information about their position. You just told them they have the power in this dynamic, that you'll absorb almost anything to maintain access. Reaching out to someone 12 times because they haven't responded isn't love. It isn't care. It's the public display of someone who has made another person's response the condition of their stability. And that person isn't just a target. They're an ideal target, because they won't leave. They won't enforce consequences. They'll stay and absorb, and the predator can extract indefinitely. Sun Tzu, whose understanding of psychological warfare has survived 2.5 millennia because it's simply too accurate to become obsolete, wrote, "Appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak." He was documenting the fundamental strategic principle that the display of your actual position is the surrender of your actual position. The cure for desperation isn't suppression. It's investment. A person who is genuinely invested in their own mission, who has a purpose so consuming, a life so internally full, doesn't reach 12 times because someone hasn't responded. Not because they don't care, but because they have somewhere to be that is more important than the anxiety of waiting for a response. Build something that matters more than what you're afraid of losing. Because as long as the fear of losing something is bigger than what you're building, you'll keep broadcasting the signal that every predator in your environment is looking for. Now step back from the 6 behaviors and look at what they share. Visible emotional reactivity, compulsive over-explanation, premature disclosure, chronic availability, the apology reflex, public displays of desperation. Every single one communicates the same thing in the predatory behavioral assessment. This person's internal world is governed by what happens outside of them. Their emotional state responds to incoming stimuli. Their communication volume responds to perceived judgment. Their information sharing responds to warmth. Their availability responds to demand. Their apologies respond to displeasure. Their desperation responds to the threat of loss. He is externally governed. And an externally governed man is a man who can be operated. Machiavelli understood this as the foundational principle of all exploitation. Men whose need for immediate satisfaction, immediate approval, immediate resolution made them permanently vulnerable to anyone patient enough to provide those things strategically rather than genuinely. The protection against all 6 behaviors isn't a technique. It's the construction of an internal world so solid, so self-sustaining, so anchored in something real that the external inputs lose their governing power. When your emotional state is anchored internally, it doesn't spike when someone is dismissive. When your communication volume is anchored internally, it doesn't flood when someone is skeptical. When your information sharing is anchored in earned trust, it doesn't open prematurely to manufactured rapport. When your availability is anchored in your own priorities, it doesn't bend automatically to every demand. When your apologies are anchored in actual accountability, they don't fire reflexively at every display of displeasure. When your sense of abundance is anchored internally, you don't display desperation because you genuinely aren't desperate. This isn't coldness. This is the architecture of a person who cannot be read by predators because the control panel is inside. And inside is where no one gets access without earning it over time through demonstrated trustworthiness in conditions you set. That person isn't a target, they're a wall. And predators don't probe walls. They move on to the next available surface. Become the wall. If this video reached something real in you, if even one of those 6 behaviors produced that specific cold recognition of seeing your own pattern named precisely then, like this video, not as a formality, but because it means this content found someone who needed it. Subscribe if you haven't. This channel exists to deliver the kind of precision most platforms are too cautious to give you. The dark psychology of human behavior laid out without softening, without the therapeutic framing that makes uncomfortable truths easier to dismiss. What I delivered in this video is the surface layer of a much deeper framework. Beneath these 6 behaviors are the specific counter-protocols, the exact behavioral and psychological moves that not only eliminate the target signals but actively communicate to predatory personalities that the assessment has been completed and the result is, do not proceed. Those frameworks exist behind the join button below. Inside is a small and deliberately selective circle of people who have decided that operating blind in a world that runs on psychological mechanics they were never taught is no longer acceptable. People who want the full architecture. The dark psychology of target selection, manipulation, defense, and predator identification at the level of detail this format cannot contain. This isn't for everyone. It was never designed to be. If you watched this video and felt not just recognition but the specific urgency of someone who wants to go further, the join button is below. The people inside already know why they pressed it. The circle stays small because that's what makes it worth being inside. You stayed until the end. That says something. In a world engineered to fracture attention in 30 seconds, the discipline to stay with something this direct, this confrontational, this precise, that isn't common. Guard that discipline the same way this video told you to guard everything else. The predators in your life are still running the assessment. The only question that matters now is what the assessment returns when it runs on you. Make sure it returns one answer, not this one. I'll see you in the next video.